What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and we are continuing our look at the 2022 schedules for each college football team, also giving you an early projected record. Keep in mind, this is not an official prediction. We are simply giving you a projection based off of how tough the schedule is for each team and roughly how good we expect each team to be this upcoming season. Before we get to 2022, let's look back at 2021. Looking back at 2021, you can see the schedule really wasn't the reason why Florida had a bad season this past year. Now, they did have to play Alabama, and they played LSU, so they had two tough games out of the SEC West, although LSU wound up finishing in last place in the SEC West. That was the team you wanted to play this past season, but you obviously didn't want to have to play Alabama. But you look at the non-conference schedule: Florida Atlantic, South Florida, Samford, and then Florida State. So they did not have a very tough non-conference schedule, although their draw out of the SEC West was obviously very tough with having to play Alabama. So now let's move ahead to 2022. Here is the schedule, and it's brutal. It is just brutal. This is going to be a very tough schedule. Might be one of the toughest in the country. Before we kind of go game by game, let's look at who they play outside of the SEC East, because of course we know they play every team in the SEC East. So they're non-division games. In the non-conference, they'll play Utah, South Florida, Eastern Washington, and on the road at Florida State. Utah's probably going to be a preseason top 10 team. Good news is you get that game at home, but it's probably a game where Utah is going to be favored. They will more than likely be underdogs in that game. Very, very tough game to start off the season. And then they'll play Florida State on the road. And Florida State is a program that you just feel like is getting closer and closer and closer. It's a rivalry game. It's going to be a tough one at the end of the season there on the road. That is not an easy game. So with Utah and Florida State both in the non-conference, that's a pretty tough non-conference schedule. And then out of the SEC West, they'll play LSU, of course. They play them every year. And then they'll also play on the road at Texas A&M. So last year they got Alabama. This year they'll have Texas A&M. That's a tough 2 years in a row right there, playing Alabama and then A&M. The schedule does not do Florida any favors there. Texas A&M might be the second best team in the SEC West in 2022, and you expect LSU with Brian Kelly to be a good team. Maybe, I don't know how it's going to go, but they could be the third best team in the West, so potentially Florida could play the second and third best team in that division. Again, a lot of question marks with LSU. We don't really know where they're going to be, but still a tough schedule there outside of the division. Now, another thing about their schedule is just the SEC East is getting better, and there's going to be some real competition in that division. But they'll start off with Utah there on September the 3rd, and then jump right into SEC play against Kentucky on September the 10th. Kentucky has a lot coming back. This is going to be a good football team. Good news for Florida is the game is at home, but it is very possible that they could start 0-2 if they slip up in these two games. But if they win both of them, and having both of them at home gives them a great chance, if they win both of those games, they could really get some momentum early in the season before playing South Florida on September 17th, and then a huge game against Tennessee on September 24th on the road. But that month of September with Utah, Kentucky, and Tennessee, that's got to be one of the toughest September schedules in all of college football. We'll find out a lot about Florida after that first month of the season. After that, they'll play Eastern Washington to kick off the month of October, Missouri on October the 8th, and then LSU on October 15th. They'll get a bye week after playing LSU, and then it's Georgia in Jacksonville. Huge game there. So if you look at the month of October, Eastern Washington, Missouri games that Florida I think will be favored in, but LSU will be a tough one, and then Georgia and Jacksonville. The good news, though, for Florida, when you look at the first 8 games, they only have one true road game, and that's on the road at Tennessee. They're going to play 6 of their 8 games at home and then one on neutral field in Jacksonville. So they won't leave the state of Florida. They'll only leave the state of Florida one time in the first 8 games. So yes, it's a tough schedule when you look at the opponents, but because of the fact that they get all those games at home, that could really help them out before going into the month of November, where they will start with Texas A&M on the road. Very, very tough game there, especially right after playing Georgia. They get South Carolina at home, and then they close things out with 2 road games, Vanderbilt and Florida State. But again, when you look at their toughest 5 or 6 games, really only a couple of those games are probably going to be on the road. Tennessee and Texas A&M. Utah at home, Kentucky at home, LSU at home, Georgia on a neutral field, South Carolina at home, a South Carolina team that's expected to be pretty good this year. So the schedule for Florida, it's really tough, but at the same time it's favorable. It's really tough just because of their opponents. I mean, you look at the schedule, easy wins, you've got South Florida, Eastern Washington, and then maybe Vanderbilt. So you have 9 really tough games, but so many of those games are at home, and I think that's going to bode well for Florida and give them a chance to have a really big bounce back in 2022. It's going to be all about those home games. Can the Gators take care of business at home? And if they can, they could, in fact, have a huge turnaround in 2022. Here are the projections from 2021. Of course, a disappointing year for Florida, finishing 6-6. Our projection was 9-3. Our prediction was also 9-3, so we went along with that projection. A lot of people thought that I was underrating this team, but yeah, they wound up going 6-6. So I was overrating this team, obviously, and it was a weird year for Florida with Dan Mullen and everything. This team was better than 6-6 if you just look at the actual team, the roster. The FBI predicted them to go about 8-4, so they were a little bit under that 9-3. They were closer, actually, than our projection. And Vegas had the over-under at 9, so you had to go over or under that. I thought 10 wins was going to be tough. Again, I had them at 9-3, but I did really think 8-4 was more likely than 10-2. So I think the better pick would have been to go under, and you would have, obviously, that would have been the better pick, and you would have got it right. But let's look ahead now to 2022. And again, these are not our official predictions. This is simply a projection based off of the schedule. This is the scale that we use. We'll have our 50-50 games in white. If it's less than 20% in red, if it's over 80% in green, 20 to 29% in orange, 30 to 39%. So a 20 to 29% game, 71-80% game, those are games where we feel like the spread's going to be double digits, a 10 to 14 point spread somewhere in there. And then your 30 to 39 and 61 to 70%. That's where we think the spread will be closer to a touchdown, 6-7 points. And then lower than that is going to be considered a 50-50 game. So the easy wins for Florida, the games that I think will be over 80%, you've got USF, Eastern Washington, and Vanderbilt. So these are all games where Florida should be favored by a lot. Now, obviously, Eastern Washington is closer to 100%, and Vanderbilt might be a little closer to 80%. It is a road game in the SEC, although not that tough of a place to play. But yeah, that's kind of a wide range there of from 80% all the way to 100%. But I think all 3 of these games, you can put them in the green. And then in the blue, I'm going to go with Missouri. I know Florida lost to Missouri last year, but when you just look at the rosters, look at the talent, the fact that the game is at home for Florida, I think they're going to be double-digit favorites in this game. And I think we can safely put that one in the blue. Not a guaranteed win. They could lose, but it would be a pretty big surprise if the Gators were to lose that game. And then on the flip side, we go to the orange here, and that's Georgia. Georgia, a game where I think Florida is probably going to be a double-digit underdog. That could change, obviously, as we get closer to that game during the season. But Georgia right now is just on a much higher level than Florida. We're talking about a top 5 team coming into this season versus a team that probably will not be ranked in Florida. So I think you can put that in the orange. All right, let's go now to the purple. Or actually, let's go to the yellow, 30 to 39%. So these are the games where I think Florida will be about a touchdown underdog. I've got Utah and I've got Texas A&M on the road. Texas A&M is close for me. You know, they're kind of in between that orange and yellow, right? You know, close to 30%, I think, because it is on the road, and Texas A&M is expected to be a top 5 or top 10 team coming into this year. And then Utah, most people are putting them in the top 10 in the preseason as well. So even though the game is at home for Florida, when we talk about a top 10 team versus a team that won't be ranked, I think Utah will be favored in this game. It could be a 50-50 game, though. We'll see. As we get closer, really evaluate these teams more. Because of the home field advantage, I was very close to putting this one at 50-50, but I had to just go with the perception of these teams and the fact that Utah is expected to be a top 10 team. Again, I might predict Florida to win this game. Just because I have this game have them as underdogs in this game. Doesn't mean I won't predict them to actually win that game, but just looking at the perception of these teams, that's why we do have that game in the yellow. And then the rest of the schedule for Florida, I think you got 5 50-50 games. Kentucky, Tennessee, LSU, South Carolina, Florida State. All of these games could really go either way. Kentucky has actually played Florida really tough as of late, of course. Tennessee's on the road. They're going to be a good team. LSU, a talented team. That one could go either way. South Carolina expected to be better. That could go either way. And then you got Florida State there at the end. It's a rivalry game. It's on the road. Florida State expected to be a decent team this year. So, yeah, I think you got 5 games that could go either way. And what happens when you average this all out? Well, the projection is 7-5. So we count the green games as wins. We average everything else out. And yes, you get a projected record of 7-5 for Florida. And I'll tell you, if you move Utah into the 50-50 range, like I mentioned earlier, that's really not going to change anything. The projection's still 7-5. So 7-5, I think, should be the goal for Florida, at least 7-5. If they go 6-6 again, it will be a disappointment. But if you can get to 7-5 or even 8-4, I think that's a pretty successful season for Florida. What do you guys think? What do you think the projection should be for this team? Give me your thoughts down in the comments below.